Now, emerging markets are up about 35% this year. Will the rally there hold, or is this just a false start while the global economy inches to recovery? Claudio Brocado is portfolio manager for BatteryMarch Financial Management, and he is finding opportunities not only in BRIC countries, but in smaller markets as well. He co-manages about $5.2 billion in emerging market stocks. Claudio's Legg Mason Emerging Markets Trust is outperforming the Emerging Markets Index 5-year performance. So congratulations on that, Claudio. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Let me ask you what you think about the gains that we've seen in emerging markets so far. I mean, not so much more serious than what we've seen in the S&P. Can you say it's an even bet between the U.S. stocks and emerging markets, or do you favor overseas?
We continue to favor emerging markets, and we continue to think that over the long term, emerging markets will outperform the developing world because of much more attractive fundamentals in the developing world.
And cheaper valuations as well?
Yeah, they're trading about 1 point lower in terms of valuations.
What emerging market? Let's talk about regions first. Where do you think the best opportunities lie? Are there any regions that have been unfairly punished and are due for a bigger bounce back?
At BatteryMarch, we're very much stock pickers, so bottom-up investment decisions. That said, we do see opportunities in the BRIC countries, particularly in Brazil.
Particularly in Brazil. Why is that?
Because coming into this crisis, Brazil is much better prepared than other developing markets, particularly those in Eastern Europe, and it's weathering this crisis much better than it has in the past due to much more policy flexibility, due to the good policy actions that they've taken in the last few years.
How much longer do we have to go in this crisis? I mean, do you see a global recovery coming around the corner, or are the recent sort of green shoots that some people have been talking about, other people have been making fun of? Is it a head fake? Is it a fake at all?
Well, emerging markets definitely are last in, first out, so LIFO into this recession. And in the case of emerging markets, this is just a cyclical downturn, whereas in the more developed world, it's more of a structural problem. So we see emerging markets coming out of it much more quickly. We're seeing already auto sales across the emerging markets, across the BRIC countries, at higher levels than what we were seeing at this time last year, which is definitely not the case in the developed world.
When you say last in, first out, what's the lag time? I mean, we hit the crisis hard at the end of 2007 and then the entire 2008. When did they go into it, and what are the markets? How do the markets react to that?
Well, China, for example, didn't even go into a recession. Their growth rate has slowed down a bit, but they're still growing significantly. In the case of Brazil, we just got first quarter GDP numbers outperforming expectations. Within Brazil, GDP will go down at the most 1% this year, so a much more muted recession than what we're seeing in the developed world.
The employment problems as bad? I mean, what's the consumer picture look like there? You mentioned auto sales, for example, in Brazil.
Yeah, the consumer is quite strong in Brazil, and actually the exporting sector is what has suffered this time around. The consumer confidence is still near record high levels in Brazil.
All right, so if you're stock pickers, what are some opportunities our viewers can get into here?
Well, América Móvil is one of our top picks, and that is actually a Mexico-based company, but with significant presence in Brazil. They should end this year with almost 200 million subscribers. It's trading at 10 times PE, 6 times EV to EBITDA, and a double-digit free cash flow yield, which they return to shareholders, mainly in the form of stock buybacks. So that's one of our favorite picks.
American Mobile, obviously the mobile phone play there. Are there any interesting internet plays? Because you always see sort of copycat sites of the big sites here in the U.S. doing quite well in emerging markets.
Yeah, there are some, like in China, for example, Baidu is a stock and a company that's doing really well as well.
What about infrastructure plays? I mean, you think about all the stimulus that's been injected here. Obviously, there was a lot in China as well, and they seem to have done quite a lot with it. Around the world, people injecting stimulus right into their economies. Are there infrastructure plays that you can win on there? Because in the U.S., they seem to have lagged.
Yeah, one of the ones that we like a lot is Vale in Brazil, which is not directly an infrastructure stock, but it really does feed into the Chinese infrastructure build-out through their global leadership in iron ore.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us, Claudio.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Claudio Brocado from BatteryMarch Financial Management. We're going to take a quick break here, and when we come back, the cost of living in the U.S. has fallen over the past 12 months. So does that mean we can take inflation